Andrew Barnes is a researcher and a strategist at the agency Ebony and Ivory and says that brands are no longer needed as identifiers because our work is changing. Welcome to you. First of all, identifiers themselves. Define the concept to me in brand terms.
In brand terms, Jeremy, identifiers are labels that we wear to extend our personality, to give definition to our personality, to create an identity so that we can project an image onto the world. And that's how I think traditionally brands have been used, particularly in the 70s and the 80s, especially amongst young people.
So give us an example of how they might be used as an identifier.
Well, I think some of the really strong brands that we can see immediately that are identifiers would be something like Harley Davidson, where you see the brand extension running into other items of apparel, sunglasses and so on.
So it's the full-on leverage through the spectrum, in other words. Yeah.
Absolutely, and people associate with the brand because it becomes an extension of their personal identification, as it were.
But isn't that what all brands strive for, is to become part of a consumer's DNA?
It is true. Brands originally started as just being a label to denote the origin and sometimes to denote a certain quality standard. But it has moved, and in that regard, Jeremy, you're quite right. Brands have become, I think I wrote in that note to you, have become an abstraction, where the brand has actually become separate from the core substance or the core product underneath it.
What has caused that separation or that differentiation, do you think?
I think it's an opportunity that's been exploited by marketers. I think it's also an opportunity that has arisen due to the way that people behave in society. And one of the things that I think is prevalent is that our work, and I'm drawing from Karl Marx here, not that I'm a communist in any regard, but our work has alienated us from our self-perception, our self-identity. So people have adopted brands to create identities for themselves. And I think the work alienation has exacerbated this process.
Is that detrimental to brands then? If so, in what respect?
No, I think it's just what's happened. I'm not making a value judgment. I'm quite optimistic about the future because I think that in a way, our work is changing. And if we look at the youth these days, and this is where I think marketers are a little bit slow to understand what has happened. If we look at the youth these days, they have very or far larger opportunities to extend their own self-identity and project an identity on the world. They're interfacing on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter and various social media. They're chatting on the messenger apps. And they have very clear identities. In fact, I see the youth with far more self-confidence than you and I might have had when we were young. And to that extent, the youth is behaving differently because they don't have to associate with brands such as you and I might have wanted to when we were young.
Speak for yourself, Andrew Barnes. We're both still young. How do brands then need to reintegrate themselves into the conversation? Because that's ultimately what you're striving for.
Well, I think one of the terms...
How do they need to think differently?
Yeah, I think one of the terms that's bandied about now is inbound marketing. You know, consumers, and I don't like that word, consumers are really the gatekeepers, and they're the ones that will determine or dictate on what terms brands will be accepted. So it's not as much as what a brand purports to be, it's what a consumer really wants a brand to be to them that will determine the success going forward.
So brands have got to listen to consumers with a greater degree of authenticity, a greater degree of understanding about what they actually want out of that. But often, Andrew, brands are not giving them that space to do so.
No, they're not. I think also at the root of it, a brand has to these days be a protagonist. A brand has to fight for something, has to stand for something. It has to be involved in the community.
With all its inherent risk.
Absolutely.
Which is difficult sometimes.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything's easy.
Particularly in a depressed climate.
You know, if you think back to the 70s and the 80s, and I saw yesterday the first TV commercial was flighted in America. First TV commercial ever was flighted in 1946. So it's really a very recent history of advertising that we're talking about. But if you think of the old double-page spreads in the Sunday Times, the TV commercials, they were so absorbing and captivating. That doesn't happen anymore. It really doesn't. So the media has a different job in projecting brands.
Thank you very much for joining us. Andrew Barnes, researcher, strategist at the Ebony and Ivory Agency. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jeremy.